right, thank you for joining us. I want to welcome you to today's lunchtime webinar, Managing Nashville's Emerald Ash Borer Epidemic. We're going to be starting here shortly, but I do want to thank you for joining us and taking a few minutes to learn about this important issue that is facing Nashville homeowners and ash trees all over Davidson County. We'll be starting here very shortly. All right, if you've just joined us, we want to thank you for joining the Managing Nashville's Emerald Ash Borer Epidemic webinar. We're going to be starting here in a few minutes. If you just joined us, thank you so much for taking time out of your lunchtime to join this webinar on Managing Nashville's Emerald Ash Borer. This is an important issue. If you live in Tennessee, anywhere pretty much, and you have ash trees in your yard or know somebody who does, this is a webinar that's going to be helpful for you. All right, Jennifer, I think we should go ahead and start.
Right.
I'm Sharon Smith, and I want to welcome you to today's webinar, Managing Nashville's Emerald Ash Borer Epidemic. This webinar is brought to you by Metro Public Works, the Metro Tree Advisory Committee, and Root Nashville, working together to try and increase Nashville's tree canopy and provide useful and helpful information to you on trees in Nashville. Today, Jennifer Smith, who's the Public Works horticulturalist and a tree wizard, will be talking about the pandemic around the emerald ash borer, which is attacking ash trees. I believe, Jennifer, it's all across the United States, isn't it?
Slowly moving around, yes.
Yes. So once again, I want to thank you. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer. Jennifer, you're on. Oh, wait a minute. Before I turn it over to you, during today's webinar, if you have any questions, look down at the bottom of your screen and you're going to see a little Q&A. You can enter your questions into the Q&A. And after the webinar is over, Jennifer will be answering your questions. So please feel free, as you listen to the webinar and you have questions, go ahead and enter them there. All right, Jennifer, you're on.
Thank you so much, Sharon. So yes, the emerald ash borer is an epidemic in our Davidson County, and it is estimated that there's 1.6 million ash trees in our county, 1.6 million. And if you want to save your ash tree, these are our native ash trees, you need to treat them. Otherwise, we're going to lose them. Very sad. It's going to change our whole landscape. So what we're finding is that the emerald ash borer actually came to this country from Asia. It was used as a shipping container in one of these big vessels you see here. And it came across and was ground zero was in Michigan. So that's where they first found it. And it was a big day. I remember all the people in the tree world got that memo and we were not happy. We knew eventually it would get to Tennessee. So it came in 2002. It was first detected in 2002. And then we had it here in 2010. It was found in a truck stop outside of Knoxville, because what I envision is someone traveling and moving wood for firewood and dropped some firewood there at the truck stop. And that's when it was first noted and detected in our state. And then you can see the Division of Forestry quarantines counties as they have the ash. And we were quarantined. It was first detected in our county in 2014. And I remember that day very well. And it's slowly moving across the rest of Tennessee. But you look at this bug and you go, oh, it can't be that harmful. Look how beautiful it is. But actually, it's the size of about a cooked grain piece of rice. It's quite small. And it's eating on the food. It's eating on the leaves of the ash tree. So what does it do? So once the mature ash borer it flies. It can fly, and it can so ash borers can be moved by firewood, or they can fly. And they, on the bark of the ash wood, they lay their eggs. And one female can lay 50, 60, 70 eggs. And once they hatch, the larvae bore into right behind the bark of the tree, into the live tissue there. And the live tissue is where the tree is taking in its water and food from the roots up in this area. The center part is the pith. That's the older wood. So it comes in here and eats the live tissue, and it makes it so that water cannot go up into the leaves of the tree. So the larvae eat for about 1 to 2 years, and they pupate, which means they change from a larvae to the borer. And they exit the tree in this, all exits are this D-shaped exit wound, and it's so tiny. It's about the size of a pencil head, if you will. And they're usually higher up into the tree where they've been living. So it's very hard for us to see them. So once they're out, they fly onto another tree and start the process over and over again. So here in Nashville, we feel like this growing season, we're at least at 60%, probably towards the end of the season, we're much higher, maybe up to 70%. We're just seeing a lot of dieback already in our county. So you need to determine if you have an ash tree, so you can make a management plan and be thinking not only if you have one, but your neighbor may have one that may affect you in your property. So it has this leaflet. These are little leaflets, and this makes up its leaf. It's this beautiful, it just hurts me to see this. It's this beautiful diamond shaped, kind of a gray bark. And in the younger years, it's more of a slick bark. It hasn't developed all that ridges yet. And then they produce the oar-shaped seeds. Now, one of the things that I think makes it the easiest to determine if you have an ash tree is if you're looking up into the branches, you'll see that the branches are opposite. And this one is growing out one side, but more or less they're all opposite. But they can be confused with other trees that also have those leaflets, like the walnut, the hickory. You can see the walnut, the hickory, and the box elder. But here's a good example of the branches. And the maples and dogwoods are also opposite. So you're going to ask, is my ash tree infested? Well, by now, many of them in our county are. We've gone from 0% through this growing season to about 30%. Now, what does that mean? This tree gets very brittle. It's the wood of this is used for the Louisville slugger, the bat, and it can get very brittle because it just literally dries the tree out. When the water can't get up into the branches, it dries the tree out. So at about 30%, that is the time, if you haven't treated your tree, it may be a little too late to do that. The tree won't be able to recover from that. And you can see how it continues to die back at the crown, and it just keeps on going back. But also at about 30% is when the arborists say, we're not able to climb that tree to take it down. We'll have to use a bucket truck. And that's something that we'll talk about later. And here's the larvae feeding on the tree, and that's the live tissue there. And there's these small deep exit wounds that we talked about earlier. So is your tree infested? If you pull back the bark, you see all these S-shaped tunnels, the larvae eating their way through. A tree has an amazing way to help itself. And it realizes that the water isn't getting up into the branches, to the leaves, because that is important, because you take a green leaf, and it has to have water to live, and then the sunlight, it photosynthesizes the leaf on the leaf and creates the sugars to feed the tree, and then it goes back down, the food comes back down to feed the tree. Well, it knows it's not getting the water at the top, and the leaves are not growing or living, so it sends out these sprouts at the base. So when you see that, you know there's a mechanical issue going where the water can't get up, and that tree is doing all it can to save itself. It can dry out, and you might see some vertical splits. And one of the things we're all going to start being able to see is, just as we're driving through the city, you'll see this flecking, because the woodpeckers are going in and trying to find the larvae to eat, and they fleck off the outside bark, and they're going in for the larvae. Blonding is another word that it's called. So once you know you have an ash tree, you've got to make a management decision, because over here you'll see this is the ash snap. See how it can just snap off at the base? And so they become dangerous. And so you need to decide if you're going to treat your tree, you're going to let it die in place, or you remove it. Now, if you let it die in place, and if it can fall in any direction and not hurt people or property, you may choose to let it die. That's one option you can consider. Also, though, remember, your tree could fall into your neighbor's yard, or their tree could fall in your yard. So that's where it's, concerned that you help them understand what you're learning today and determine if they have an ash tree that needs management. Removing it. Now, we're getting to that phase where they're going to get to where you have to have a bucket truck. So let's say you determine that you have an ash tree in your backyard, and there's a fence around it or on a slope, and you can't get a bucket truck to it. A lot of people are going ahead in advance having their trees removed, and that is a management option. As we get more and more that need to be removed, the supply and demand of finding the arborist workforce to take it down could potentially be an issue as well. But you can also treat it. Now, this is not a one-time deal. It's for the healthy life of that tree. So you have to take that in consideration when you're doing the finance, to say, well, it takes this much money to take my tree down and this much money to treat my tree. These are things you have to consider. So right now we feel like the soil drenching and the bark spray, it's too late in the epidemic in our community to do these options. These were only, especially the soil drenched, for a tree that's about 10, 11 inch in diameter. But the bigger ash trees, and now any ash tree, the chemical injection has been the only solution. And it's been good for 2 years, and they're trying to make a new chemical that would help make it last for 3 years, and that would be amazing. That would be so helpful. So these are done by professional. You have to have a certification in chemical application. So this is not something that you come out in your yard and do. And by all means, don't say, oh, this weekend, let's just go out and cut that ash tree. Because again, once it gets brittle enough, it can snap. So those are some really health issues, safety issues to consider. So what is your responsibility? You have your tree, your neighbor's tree, a tree that's on the boundary between your yard and your neighbor's yard, and then you have the right-of-way tree. Well, if for your neighbor's tree, we talked a little bit about that. You need to have communication with them about the ash tree and how it can snap over, and get an understanding. I did this with my neighbor, and I'm glad we did. So it's better to do that. I know sometimes people say, oh, it's a little awkward. It is, but when you come together in something like this, everyone understands. A boundary tree is a tree that's between you and your neighbor's yard. I had one of the ash trees as a boundary tree, and so both, even if it's 50-50 or 80-20%, both property owners are supposed to come together and make management decisions about that tree. So in the case of my tree, my neighbor and I split the cost to have that treated. Now, in the public right-of-way, that's the area just off the road. And it can be potentially, if you have a sidewalk, there's maybe a green strip there, and the tree may be planted on that. Or if you don't have a sidewalk in your front yard, you might see that water main box. Just a general rule of thumb, from the back of the water main box to the street may be the right-of-way. And if you have an ash tree in that zone, Metro Public Works, who's over the right-of-way, will take that tree down. But we'd like for you to call our 311, that's a Hub Nashville, taking all sorts of calls on many issues. But if you are treating your tree in the right-of-way, because we will not be treating trees in the right-of-way, but if you are, please call us and let us know so that we don't take it down. And we are getting many people who are choosing to treat their ash trees in the right-of-way, which is another option. But remember, you're going to have to do it again. And in my case, in my yard, I thought, I think I'll just delay my decision of whether I'm going to take my ash trees down for a few years, and that's why I had them treated. That buys me a little more time to get prepared if I do decide to take them down. So proper debris disposal. In Nashville, our brush collection meets this standard. So if you cut the wood, don't move it, but if you cut it and the chipper will cut it to at least about a 1-inch square, that does not provide enough food for the boar, the larvae, to live. So they will die. So that's a good thing. And again, our brush collection, for those who get that, meets that standard. But do note that the Metro Brush Collection Program is not for the commercial properties or to be used by professionals. It's mainly for the homeowner and what you yourself cut and bring out to the street. But so we have more resources on the EAB, or just schedule a talk for your neighborhood or church group. We're happy to talk, and now that we can do a Zoom presentation, that's worked out as well. But if you go to trees.nashville.gov, you will see our noted brochure that has a lot of the information that we're going over today. And you can download it from our website. It's the one with the big boar on it. So we also know that many of our citizens in Nashville have never have hired an arborist before. So we are putting a few tips on that. So for instance, ask for proof of liability insurance. Get written bids with start and completion dates. Make sure that cleanup and proper disposal are included, as we just talked about. Ensure the company is qualified to do the work, because this has hazard issues. And hire an arborist trained in safety procedures. So when you call an arborist, you can ask them about these issues to make sure that they're up on them to protect you and them. So, wow, losing 1.6 million ash trees in our county, it's going to really change our landscape. And we're already losing a lot of trees to old age or these storms and through development. So we really are asking all of our citizens to replant, because trees, they improve our air quality, they help reduce energy costs, they help abate stormwater runoff, so they help prevent flooding. And it's a great home. Trees are the home to our wildlife, birds, squirrels. And then I think another main reason is that they provide natural character and beauty to our community. So there's many ways to plant. There's many nonprofits out there that are promoting tree planting. We've got Root Nashville campaign, whose goal is to plant 500,000 trees by 2050. And if you do plant a tree, please go on their website and you can map it. You go to the map and you put a dot where your tree is, and that's kind of fun. Make sure that you plant a variety of trees. We don't want to come back with all one kind of tree species like the ash and then lose all those to perhaps another issue down the road. But consider the mature size of your tree. Look up, are there utility lines above? What's the mature size of this tree going to be? Call 811, call before you dig so you know where your under ground utilities are. You want to avoid those, of course. And then keep your tree healthy and properly watered. It's really important to water for about 3 years and then times of drought. So when you plant your tree, we'll look at that. There are just a few things that you need to do right, but they're very important. So your hole you dig is twice as wide as the root ball. Roots actually breathe. So if you plant your ball deep into the hole, the roots, it could lead to its ultimate death, because roots have to have the oxygen to grow. Just, it's a living organism. So plant the top of your root ball about 2 inches above ground. That's very important. If you don't hear anything else I say, that's really important. Fill the hole with the exact soil you took out, because if you're going to put fertilizer or compost, it's going to make this area really special, really sweet. And the roots aren't going to want to grow out into this area. They're going to stay there. It's called the bathtub effect. And that's another reason why trees can fail, is too much fertilizer in this area and the roots just don't go out. Did that again. The roots just don't go out into the new environment. And you can add mulch, but about 2 inches, no mulch volcano, just at the top. And that helps prevent from the lawnmower and weed eater into sustained moisture. And then that was a landscape approach. If you have an area that needs to be replanted or reforested, if you will, this is that approach. The forestry approach is by planting seedlings. And so you do the same kind of planting. Don't plant them too deep. And basically, in a forestry approach, now if you just have a few in your yard, you can say, okay, I'll be watering them. But a forestry approach is they'll go out and plant maybe 100 seedlings in the area, and they don't intend to come back and water or care for them. We'll make sure no one mows over them, so the area is a no-mow zone. And let's say if 70% of those seedlings live, that's quite a success story. So that's another way of considering planting. Now, what's going to happen? You plant your tree, and it sits there, and you're like, okay, what next? Well, a tree has to get used to its new environment, and it doesn't have as many roots as it did in the nursery. So the first year, it's just sleeping. It's just there. It's getting used to it. Fall is the best time. Starting the fall through the winter and early spring is the best time to plant, because there are no leaves on the tree. So in the dormant season, it would take so much energy, so much more roots to plant a tree with leaves on it. So it's getting used to its new environment. The second year, the roots are starting to creep out into its new place. So it sleeps, it creeps. And the third year, the tree's going, yay, I have a lot of roots now here. I can afford to grow. I have enough food coming to me. So it leaps. So it sleeps, creeps, and leaps. So that's what you can expect when you're planting or after you plant your tree. So as a citizen of our county, how can you help? Well, talk with your family and friends and neighbors about the EAB emerald ash borer epidemic. It is a big deal. Plant a tree in your yard. Volunteer for community tree planting. Remember, we have Root Nashville campaign. The Nashville Tree Foundation is planting trees or giving away trees all through the fall. And they have a reliefing day It's always the Saturday before Thanksgiving, and they've been doing this for about 25, 30 years. And don't move firewood. Buy it where you burn it. That's a national campaign. Don't move any kind of firewood, ash tree or any other kind. And in Nashville, we have all these different groups, from extension to our nonprofits. Another nonprofit tree group is the Nashville Tree Conservation Corps, and they're working also in helping to replant our city. So we've got a lot of nonprofits that you can work through to help our cause, to keep a healthy, sustainable urban forest in our city. So we have questions time now, Sharon, but I do want to just leave this slide up so you can just get a better memory, if you will, of what the ash tree looks like. So you can go out and identify. And remember trees.nashville.gov, and you can download this brochure, which has the photos in there as well that can help you, same photos, determine if you have an ash tree. So thank you for listening today, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
All right, Jennifer, we have some questions. We have a couple of questions, and those of you who are have joined us, if you think of any other questions, feel free to go ahead and type them in. First question, Jennifer, is what's the cost, or probably I should say the approximate cost of inoculation?
It is
a difficult one.
Yeah, and when we first started doing this, it's done by the diameter inch of a tree, and it was on average about $10 a diameter inch. But I have a feeling that as we get into the thick of the epidemic, and it's supply and demand, right? There's more people that need the inoculation on their trees than we have people, so they'll perhaps go up. That's another thing of, making your management plan now and acting on it now can help you save money. Good question.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, this is a two-parter. TDEC, and for those of you who are not familiar, that's the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation, has stated that developing an EAB action plan in a community is essential to EAB management. This plan includes taking inventory of ash trees in the community. So my questions are, who has been responsible for creating an EAB action plan in Nashville? And then after you answer that, I'll get you the next one.
Well, you're looking at one of the main people. We have for all metro departments, we have an EAB working group that meets and discuss the issues and inventorying of our ash tree. And we also are having funds through the stormwater department to pay for inventorying in the public right-of-way and on stormwater properties. And what we're finding, fortunately, I think, is on the right-of-way so far, we have found that less than 2% of the trees we've inventoried are ash trees. So that's something to be grateful for. It could have been much, much higher. But really where the ash tree count is high is in our parks, where they've naturalized over time. So a lot of the ash tree, I would say, the ash trees haven't been a popular landscape tree like oak and maple and dogwoods in this community. But the ash trees have been busy naturalizing and through their seeds, planting themselves. And that's why there's so many in our parks, and they'll be in let's say farmland, wooded areas in the county.
All right, and you've already sort of touched on the inventory. Who was responsible for creating the ash tree inventory in Davidson County, and is the information public?
So we're not in general having our inventories public per se. We'll tell you what percentage and things like that. That's for management purposes mostly. But again, we were very fortunate that stormwater and the fees that they collect that you pay every month in your bill, some of those funds are going to to this very important tool. You know, it's hard to manage what you don't know you have. And so being able to understand how many ash trees, we're going to have funds to take those ash trees down. We, you know, especially in the right of way where it's very important. Um, Public Works, I think, has always done a good job that public safety is number one. And these ash trees, because they potentially can snap, we will be proactive in trying to work to get those down. Very important.
So I think basically in summary, so Jennifer, correct me if I'm wrong, the ash tree
Yeah.
inventory has been on the right of way. So that's along metro streets and roads. It has been on metro property, such as parks property, general services, but it has not been on private property. Is that correct?
Correct. That is
Yes.
correct. And that's why it's so important that you listen today and to learn, you know, how to identify an ash tree. And so you can make your own management plan.
Absolutely, and it would be the responsibility of the property owner to identify and determine how to handle ash trees on their property.
And it's going to be their responsibility as the owner to fund their treatment, or they're taking that tree down. I'm starting to get some questions about that. That is not something that the city will be doing. And just it's a responsibility of the homeowner, the property owner, to manage what's on their property.
And somebody asked if the ash trees have been mapped. And I know that there's been some mapping, but due to funding, I don't believe, Jennifer, that even all of the right-of-way trees have been mapped quite yet, much less the enormous number on parks properties.
Right. And we may never get, you know, we're 525 square miles, lots of roads. So further out in the county where it's wooded farmland, we probably will never get out that far. But we started in downtown Nashville and then keep going around and keep going further and further out and getting this inventory. And I have to say, I was relieved that it was as low as it was. I was very pleased with that. But, you know, our parks have thousands of them, and it will change the landscape as we know it. I will say this, and this is very important. In our wooded areas, when these trees, when they get brittle and dry out and fall over, there's going to be a lot of sunlight in our parks and wooded land on private property. And what we don't want to happen is invasive, like privet and honeysuckle, say, there's sunlight, I'm going to go over there and spread over there. That can happen. So hopefully through different nonprofits and organizations, and some of the parks have friends groups, that they will go out and plant those areas with native plants, seedlings and bushes and shrubs, so that we will not lose more of our character of our woods.
Well, here's a great question, Jennifer. You mentioned that it's too late to go with the soil drench treatment. Is it even true that if you've been treating the tree for the past several years, or is that only the case if you've just started to treat the tree right now?
Well, okay, so the soil drench is a yearly event, whereas the injections were every other year and moving towards every third year, hopefully. So much of this is new science. So you probably have some of that chemical in the tree already, but if you treated a tree that's really bigger than 10 to 12 inches in diameter, that isn't effective enough for that size of tree. I mean, if it's bigger, you really have to do the injections. But keep trying. It's very inexpensive. You go to the box stores and you get the different products for the soil drench. And I would keep trying, because I know, I mean, if you really want to keep that tree, you may need to do the injection. But I would, if it was my tree and it was that small, I would be willing to keep using the drench and see if it's built up over time in my tree.
All right, Jennifer, here's our last question. Can you suggest on holding off on all proposed ash trees for new development for the foreseeable future?
Oh, 100%, and then some. I hope none of our nurseries, we talked to our nurseries a long time ago about not even growing ash trees because of this epidemic. But what we know too is when will the ash move out of our community? Will it ever be safe? And frankly, the research is still being worked on that. This is a relatively new issue. But when a tree dies, it can sprout back up some. And that's keeping the food source in this community. So as long as there's any ash in the community, there will be the borer, we believe, in the community. So that's why we don't think it's a good to plant an ash tree unless you just plan on, treating it its whole life. But that's not a sustainable solution. And so the nurseries have known of this problem and should not be selling them.
Okay, we have another question. So maybe this is the last question.
Okay.
What about building where they already have ash trees that would have to be cut down?
Well, so when you, depending on what your situation is, but if you're building and have to come under our tree ordinance, an ash tree is one of those trees that, it isn't going to count towards your tree count because we know it's not sustainable.
Okay. Well, Jennifer, that looks like all of our questions for today. Do you have any parting thoughts for our listeners?
I really ask you to get out there and share this knowledge with as many people because we saw it a lot this growing season. Next growing season, it's going to be even more. So we need to let people know because of the hazard factor in this epidemic. We need to get out there, and we have the Metro Tree Advisory Committee. We have a lot of people trained to give this presentation, and we can come. Well, we used to come to garden clubs and civic groups, but we can Zoom, or we have these some of these taped in our library, and you can just use one of them at your meeting. But it is so important that we get the word out. And it's interesting, I thought, oh, we're going to have an epidemic. Well, a pandemic topped the epidemic, but it's still important for everyone to be proactive in this issue.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate you taking time to learn about ash trees and the emerald ash borer. I hope everybody has a great day, and please consider joining our tree talk. Jennifer, do you know when the next tree talk is going to be?
Probably the third Tuesday of the month at noon.
All right, and if you go to trees.nashville.gov, you can see our upcoming. It's going to be, well, we don't have one on the calendar, but we probably should.
On fall planting.
Okay, good deal. All right, thank you all for joining us and have a great day.
Thank you all.